I have a problem with art that is too rhetorical. It is not that I think that there is an inherent problem with wanting to showcase a specific message in your creation, but rather that I see a tendency in art of that kind. And this tendency is that of wanting so much to pass on the idea and the message that the form of the work becomes completely secondary, serving merely as the glass recipient in which you dump your liquid argument. And art, as I often say, is usually not about the what, but about the how. If you concern yourself too much with the defense of an argument and let your presentation of it be only a decoration, chances are you won't end up with a good work, but with mere insincere propaganda, because the form is what matters. Let us take an example using anime, of all things. If you look at early Naruto, you'll see a person feeling lonely, who feels the desperation of solitude and wants to achieve a goal, which he thinks will help him get out of this dire state. He finds, however, that it's not reaching that particular objective which grants us our peace of mind, but it is the relationships that we make along the way that truly rescues us from suffering. Now let's turn to Berserk, where you see a person feeling lonely who feels the desperation of having lost everything that mattered and wants to achieve a goal which he thinks will help him get out of this dire state. He finds, however, that it's not reaching that particular objective which grants us our peace of mind, but it is the relationships that we make along the way that truly rescues us from suffering. You see what I mean? Granted, these two stories are not exactly the same, but both of them you can extract a similar message. And yet, the form is so goddamn different that claiming that they are the same is just madness. But does that mean that there's no point in conveying messages through art? Not at all. Especially when you're talking about narrative driven art. Wanting to showcase a message can help you build up your story, if it is a parable or not. How you're gonna do it is still going to be the defining factor of how good your work will be, but the message can be vital to it. And sometimes I come across a piece of media that explains something perfectly, which is a great delight since some arguments are very important and need to be presented. And I want to break down a message from one of the shows I think best explores and convey arguments through its narrative, South Park. I think the best way I can compliment South Park is by saying that they are still able to create meaningful, creative, and deliciously absurd social satire. In a world that has become so absurd that reality seems like a parody of itself, doing what they do is no small feat. And what's more, they don't just stop at the satire, throwing the care about characters and narrative out of the window. No, it is all carefully constructed, made so the story flows smoothly without deus ex machinas and sudden inserts of arguments. Not to mention, it is really fucking funny. Really fucking funny. And not in a little air came out of my nose as I revel in the smartness of the joke, just really funny. My compliments at the construction of South Park aside, they are our subject here because I can't really think of another show that is able to build itself around arguments and social commentary while still maintaining its quality as a series and not becoming shallow advertisement. And today I want to explore with you guys a message that really hit home with me, and one that I believe is incredibly important for us humans, especially today. I want to talk about the 7th episode of the 21st season entitled Doubling Down. At this point in the series, the somehow very loved Nazi, no, not this one, has managed to get a girlfriend in Heidi Turner. But as being Eric Cartman, he is incredibly abusive with her, manipulating her and making her eat meat even if she's a vegan by claiming that regular meat is beyond meat, and then mocking her for becoming fat. Yes, the hypocrisy, I know. But all pretty normal Cartman stuff. But Heidi decides to break up with him after he calls her a whore and throws her in front of a literal car. But after he cries and humiliates himself, she takes him back, only for him to go back to his usual antics and mistreat and devalue her as often as possible, because of course he would do that. At this point, if by some chance you have not watched this episode yet, you might be thinking that this episode will have a message about toxic relationships and how it happens. And all of that is for sure an element here, but the creators of the show still had one more thing to show us, as South Park normally has multiple storylines in its episodes. We see the White House, where Mr. Garrison, South Park's Trump, is making a mockery of the US presidency. He's conducting his policy of fucking them all to death, and so getting US into hot water, as he mistreats and uses the country in a very abusive relationship. The other Republican leaderships try to stand up to Garrison, only to be another victim of his policy, albeit not fatal ones. The interview of the Republican right after is very clear, a blanket over him as he is all beat up, but still defends the president. All very typical behavior of people inside abusive relationships. This makes a parallel not only between abusive romantic relationships and Trump and the government, but also to his voters. And the connection with the Cartman and Turner dynamic is also plain to see. So this is it, right, Mr. Moon? This is a political message of showing the inherent toxicity of the Trump presidency and how his voters are trapped in it, right? Well, no. I mean, the political angle is here, no doubt, but what really catches my eye in this episode is not a political statement or how romance can easily turn into abuse. No. What I really wish people got in this episode is best represented by this scene. Here, the girls are at what seems like a birthday party for one of them, as they start talking about Heidi and Cartman's recently ended relationship, as she ended again in the episode with him. Although it starts very cheerful and complimentary to Heidi for ending it, the conversation quickly turns into mockery. It isn't quite bullying, but it is a mixture of hard jokes based not on hypotheticals, but on things that actually happened. I want you to make an exercise with me. Imagine you've taken a decision in life, a major one. A lot of people you know tell you it's a bad idea. Some tell you to reconsider, to think things over. Others are less flattering, mocking you. Or, what's worse for me, they ridicule people who have done the same thing as you are doing without knowing of your decision, which scares you to tell them the truth. Now I want you to imagine, what if you actually did a mistake? What if deep down you agree with those critics, or just have doubts? Do you go back on your actions? If you do so, it is very likely that at the very minimal, you'll hear an "I told you so." People will remember that decision and maybe make fun of you. And worst of all, you will feel ashamed and stupid. Something that you dedicate so much time that you have built your identity around has become a source of regret. For many, this is just too much to bear. And so the title of the episode gets obvious. People double down on their decisions. They are far too into it to now go back and feel like idiots. This is why it is so hard to take people out of cults, multi-level marketing schemes, radical political ideologies, or toxic relationships. How can someone leave this thing which has become so central to whom she or he is? And the worst we can do is push that person, throw their mistakes, or better, what we see as their mistakes, in their faces. We just make they get enclosed together with people who will give them the relief of hearing what they want to hear, or making them feel like they are right and not ridiculous. And this episode captures that also perfectly. Heidi is now in a positive relationship. She's back to her social life with her friends. She's not being abused anymore. Yet, the ridicule she faced was too much. She does not want to live like that. To feel like such investment of time and self was stupid. And so she goes back to manipulative Cartman, him being the only one who won't ridicule her for choosing him. To close this video, I believe there's one criticism that this episode deserves in terms of its message. It conveys beautifully that yes, we shouldn't belittle or mock people who are doing something we consider ludicrous, because that's going to make them double down on that decision. But while doing that, it can't help but patronize the people who have made the decisions the show deemed stupid. Trump supporters and Heidi are the people we should empathize with in this episode. And yet, that empathy comes from the fact that the show and we, the audience, recognize their decision as very stupid. But then there's a question. How can we prevent people from taking such decisions? How do we do it without condescendence? How do we talk to them? These questions are not answered here, but really, it is not an obligation of the show to do it. It already made an excellent job at portraying how bad it is to act in a way that undermines other people. After all, do you really want to get that person out of that bad decision, of that bad situation, or do you just want to feel like you're in the right? It might be something that is just very common in my culture, in my country, since I never left it for more than a month. But the internet makes me think it isn't so. How many times have you done this? How many times have you ridiculed people, even if you did not know them, even if they were not present? I can say that I have far too many indeed, and no good came from that. The most I got out of it was relationships with people who did the same and who enabled that from me. It is hard, but even if we don't know all the details and procedures that are adequate, maybe we should just try refraining from mocking other people in that way. Otherwise, they'll just double down and continue doing what they do. Thank you guys so much for watching. This was a video that I really wanted to make because this message is one that really hit home with me. Thank you so much. Subscribe if you got until here, leave a like, and until the next one.